Persuasion. Persuasion. Welcome to Persuasion. Hello, everybody. Today, I'm so excited for another episode of Persuasion because we're joined with newly elected Assemblywoman from District 16, Cecilia Gonzalez. How are you doing today?
Hi, thank you so much. I'm doing great. How are you?
Very good. So I actually was looking at your Twitter feed today, and I noticed that you're also doing a PhD degree at the same time, right?
Yes, I'm getting my PhD in multicultural education.
Awesome. So what's that like, juggling school with also running for office at the same time?
Yeah, it was very hectic. I've had to make a lot of decisions on what I do with my time because it's so limited. When you're in a doc program or even a master's program, depending on like what you're getting your master's for, it really is like a full-time job. And so, I'm juggling like being in classes and then the coursework that comes with that, with running a campaign and then being in a pandemic and work. And so, time management is really, really important. There were weeks where I messed up on my time management and there were weeks where it was, great and I was able to get things done. And so I think the biggest lesson is knowing where and how to manage your time.
Yeah, I just actually graduated from my master's program this year, and I could not imagine running for office at the same time. So honestly, I look up to you. I think that's something to really commend you about. So could you tell us a little bit about why you decided to run for your district?
Yeah, so first of all, congratulations on completing a master's. Grad school is like a whole nother beast. So anybody that pursues higher education, amazing, congratulations, and you should be proud of all your hard work. But yeah, so I actually decided to run for my district when the seat became available. I was getting ready to run for office. I was actually getting ready to run for a different office when this seat became open. And so I decided to put my name in the hat, and I'm so glad that I did, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be here today. But one of the things that was also really important to me, when filing ended, I saw that I was the only person of color and the only woman. And so it kind of solidified that, had I really not decided to run, like we wouldn't have me, a woman, but also a person of color, right? And so that was very important to me as well.
And I know at our organization, we were just so excited for more Asian Pacific Islander representation because there's just definitely not enough out there. And considering how big Nevada's growing population is, I think showing those faces, especially in the political world, is really important too. So you talked a little bit about being a person of color. You are half Thai and half Mexican, is that correct?
Yes.
So what was that like growing up in Nevada? Because I think you said you're a native Nevadan as well, right? What was that like growing up as mixed race?
Yeah, so growing up as a biracial woman has many different layers, right? I'm a woman, I'm a queer woman, I'm a woman of color, and I'm biracial. And so that has provided a really unique way that I've had to navigate the world. A lot of times folks, even still today, right? We still don't know how to interact with biracial people, right? We have to be one or the other. And I think growing up, I really much lived life that way. You were either Latina or you were not. You were either Thai or you were not, right? But I think that in the last couple of years, I've really just celebrated being both, and that, it's okay to be both. It's okay to celebrate both. Celebrating one does not take from the other, and being one or having more knowledge of one also doesn't take from the other. And so, navigating the world, I've always dealt with, well, where are you from? I'm from America. Where are you really from? I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada. No, but where are your parents from? You know what I mean? So I think a lot of folks don't also understand how like a microaggression that is really, right? You're obviously saying that I don't look like I belong, is what you're telling me. And so that's probably, if I had $1 for every time somebody asked me that, I would not need to have a job, because it's ridiculous. But again, even the other day, someone asked me, who is like the Asian or the Latin side in your family? And I said, my mom. And they were like, oh, so you're more Thai. And I'm like, I'm both. Like my mother is, Thai, my father is Mexican. So, but it has been very, very interesting. And I think that for biracial folks, like it's a struggle that we've continued to have. And, looking at our soon to be President-elect Kamala Harris, she's also the world, I think, is really grappling with the fact that she's a Black woman, but she's also an Asian woman, and that you can be both. And it's beautiful and celebratory at the same time. We don't have to be one or the other.
I'm so surprised that people still ask, like, where are you from? I used to get asked that question all the time, or some people would speak English slower to me before I started talking, like just assuming that I don't speak English. And I'm just like, no, you can talk at your normal pace. Like, I understand you fine.
Wow.
And I just moved to Las Vegas not too long ago, but I was just so surprised at the diversity here. There's so many people of mixed race, and I think that's awesome. Like you don't really get to see that in a lot of cities in America. So can you talk a little bit about your campaign specifically in this election cycle, some of the things you were able to do?
Yeah, so the primary was very interesting because my district is a very Democratic district. So a lot of the focus was in the primary. And during the primary, I'm a community organizer. I've worked the last 2 election cycles here in Nevada. And so, I had my field hat on, like, we're going to knock this out of the park. And then COVID happened, and it was a very weird kind of a pause. Nobody really knew what they were doing with their campaigns. And the traditional way of reaching out to folks was just no longer the same. And so what our campaign did was we reached out to everybody in the district to provide information about unemployment, to provide information that, we're in a pandemic, but we're here. I did a lot of check-in calls to folks in my district, and a lot of the time folks were just lonely. They just, wanted someone to speak to, and was really excited that me as a candidate was calling to just check in on them. And so although the pandemic at first seemed difficult, I think that it allowed our campaign to connect with the district in a way that wasn't traditional and maybe a little more intimate, I think, right? I would hear stories and conversations about folks on the phone. And then, so towards the end of the campaign, I want to say the last 2 weeks, our state had gone into another phase. So I decided to door knock, with social distancing. I was pretty much at the end of the street anytime someone had answered their door, really. But being able to hear folks' stories on the phone and then meeting them at the door and remembering their stories was also really awesome in connecting with people. Because I'm a people person, and I care about relationships and people. And I think that when you're in public office, those things are very important. And so being someone that folks could talk to, I think was, again, unique in the way that, I think in a traditional sense, I would have been there to be like, hey, my name is Cecilia. I'm on the ballot. Can I count on your vote? This is what I stand for, versus hey, I'm just here to let you know, I'm here if you need anything. Here's information about resources. Here's a place to go, if you have contracted the virus. During the campaign, my grandmother, she works at the park NGM, and so she was laid off. But she was able to I think we made over 300 masks for the district. And so we gave out masks as a way to help the community, because not everybody can afford a mask. And I think that this pandemic has really highlighted a lot of the economic issues that we have. And so it does become a conversation of who can afford a mask, who can afford the best mask, right? And so that is something that I'm very proud that our campaign did, because at the end of the day, whether I won or lost, I wanted to make an impact in the community.
Yeah, and I think doing everything on the grassroots level is so important. So you physically going out there, I mean, that totally means a lot to the people. They'll see your name on the ballot. They'll see your face out there on ads and whatnot. So actually seeing you in person, that probably made the difference right there. So what are some of the policies that you hope to implement in your district?
Yeah, so, I think we're really just, as a legislature as a whole, really focused on recovering from COVID. We really need to get folks back to work. A lot of people are struggling. And so, I think that that's our main focus is how do we get back on our feet as an overall state. So, yeah.
Yeah, and as you were knocking on some doors, were there any memorable stories at all from the people that you've talked to?
Yeah, so actually a couple stories. One story in particular, I had gone to their house and it was a Mexican household. And I was probably there a good like 20, 30 minutes just having conversation. But they had later texted me and they were like, this is the first time we've ever seen another Mexican person like running or even like asking us to vote for them. Like, of course, we're going to vote for you. So in that moment, it also made me realize like it really does matter when we see ourselves reflected in government. Another story that I had was a home who the husband was a frontline grocery store worker and his wife was a nurse. And so, them being both essential workers, having to juggle that with children at home, being online education, there's a lot of different things happening there. And so, that also was really, I was able to remember that story. And then when I went to knock on their door, I was like, oh yeah, like we talked a few weeks ago. So that was really memorable as well. But just talking to folks in general, I come from a grassroots organizing background. And so that's kind of like how the campaign went, because that is my background. And like I said, I wanted to impact our community.
That's awesome. I love that you remember those stories and you're able to kind of use that now that you're in public office. And I want to talk a little bit about AAPI issues. What do you think right now AAPI really care about right now? I know COVID is obviously a big one, but in general, we're leading up to ledge sessions in February. What do you think are some of the biggest issues?
Yeah, so I think in my experience, and I speak for myself as an identified Asian American, because I know that term can be like super sticky for some folks that, are given our history and our massive diversity. I think number one, our political power has definitely been building over the last couple election cycles. But I also like to say like our power has always been there. And I think that we as a demographic have been almost erased in our voice, in our issues, right? And so number one, I think visibility of our community has been really, really amazing with a lot of the groundwork that different organizations like One APIA Nevada has done over the last couple of election cycles. I think housing is a huge one for us. I can't tell you how many times I was door knocking and there would be a whole family living in one apartment that identify as Asian American, but also reminds me very much of how I grew up and how we are faced with so many different realities when we migrate here, right? And how it can be very hard in the beginning. Healthcare is a huge issue to us. Economic stability is a huge issue. Immigration, right? So I think that our demographic experiences things that others do, but because of the erasure and because of this model minority myth, we are not included in the conversation. So I think starting there is, hey, we exist. We experience these things as well, and we matter as well. And so that's something that's been very pertinent in my campaign, is talking about how we matter.
Yeah, and I understand you come from a family of immigrants, as do I. So one thing that our organization is really focused on leading up to the February legislative sessions is more accessibility to languages, and particularly on prescription medicine. So what do you think needs to be done to obtain more language accessibility? Because this is actually a lot of other counties around the U.S., they have these language services, but it's not as widespread here. So what do you think needs to be done?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I find, I am the daughter of immigrants. And so I've grown up very much translating a lot of different things at a young age that I had no idea what even meant, right? I think even till this day, I'm still translating things for my family members. And so, accessibility to language is a huge one. It's a huge barrier. And I think that bringing the issue to light is very important. For example, I've done a lot of work in the domestic violence arena, and there's an organization called Bamboo Bridges that was created so that Asian American folks had a resource for when they need translation and support. And I've done that a few times, and it makes a very big difference when you're able to read something in a language. Half of the battle sometimes is just trying to get that information so that you can make the best decision, right? And so I think bringing the issue up and letting us as elected officials know, hey, our community is experiencing these things. Here's a way that we can help, or here's a way that we're able to impact policy that has a meaningful impact. You know what I mean? And so I'm always available. I think that that's an issue that, I've experienced, like I said, translating things since I was probably 7 years old. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and because the language access part is not as widespread here, sometimes even the immigration office, they come to organizations like us to help with specifically Asian languages. And I think it really did help. I personally like to believe that AAPI was the margin of victory for this year's election. Yes. And API actually had record turnout both in Nevada and nationwide. So what do you think about this feat?
I love it. I think that as someone who is an organizer, who is identified as an AAPI, I think that it's amazing that our community is being recognized. Like I said, we've always been here. And I think that our representation is just as important. Again, there's been this historical conversation that Asian Americans are this model minority and that we don't experience issues and that our vote is not important. And we've shown that it is over the last couple of years. Asian Americans were monumental in flipping Georgia back in 2018. And I actually just wrote a paper on how Asian Americans have been erased in history, that we learned from K through 12. And so I absolutely love it. I think that for a lot of folks who are organizers, we've kind of been seeing a lot of our hard work come to light. But I also want to keep the momentum and to keep the power. I think this cycle we had, I don't know if it was the most number of Asian Americans, but there was definitely a lot more Asian Americans running for office, myself included. And so I want other folks to know that we deserve to be represented in our elected body, but that they can also obtain this as well, right? And that's very, very important when you see yourself reflected, when you see yourself in the classroom as a teacher, when you see yourself at the collegiate level as a professor, you think to yourself, wow, I can do that as well. And so I want other young folks to know that, but also to know that we matter and we're important.
Yeah, I think there were like 7 or 8 API who were elected in Nevada this year. And most of them, if not all, were women. So I think as a woman myself, I was just so excited to see all of this representation. I mean, I grew up in both the East and West Coast, where a large part of the population was Asian, but I never saw that kind of diversity and representation. So seeing that here in Nevada made me really excited. So I guess my final question for you is, do you have any advice for AAPI or anyone in the mixed race community who's really struggling to find their identity?
Yeah, wow, that's a tough question. I think for me, a lot of it came from college experience, although I know that not everyone gets the experience to go to college. It also came from being around a lot of like-minded people in terms of fighting for social justice, in terms of fighting for equality, in terms of fighting for us to just be seen and heard, right? That really helped shape my experience as growing up as a biracial person. But the advice I would say is to just be yourself. I think a lot of times we grow up being constantly told what we need to be or how we need to behave or how we need to look, whether as an ethnic group or as our gender group or as our sexuality group, right? And I think I've finally gotten to the point where I'm just comfortable being myself. I'm showing up how I show up, and whether you treat me differently based on that is your problem. But advice I would give is to just be yourself and know that there are other folks that have experienced what you experienced. So also using your voice. I think that's a huge thing. And on the campaign trail, I did have a lot of folks that were like, I experienced this the way you did, or, seeing that you're a Latina, I'm a Latina, right? And so I think that that's very, very important. And to remember that, I'm very spiritual. And so I'm very connected to praising my ancestry, my ancestors. I wouldn't be where I am without the foundation that they've laid, not only like for my family, but for generations, right? And so that's something that I think is very important as well. So just knowing your history, and it's unfortunate that people like us have to do extra work to know our history, right? In terms of, learning outside of the classroom, learning with our elders. And so, you know, going to the temple, I go to the temple, you know, not everybody does that. So whatever you need to do to feel spiritually, mentally, and physically whole is very important. And don't feel guilty about that. I think society, again, pushes these things on us that, you know, if we don't meet this metric or look this way, we're going to feel guilty, right? And so, yeah, I think that that's very important too.
That's amazing advice, and I'm so glad that you were elected for this year's election, and I wish you the best of luck with your PhD program, and also during your elected office period. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I really enjoyed it too.
Bye.
Bye. See you next time.